So, joining me today is Steve Epstein. And Steve, you are an attorney and you're also an author, correct? You have how many books now? Four books?
Yes, I have four published books, correct.
So, it begs the question because obviously, as an attorney, you're very busy and you're working a full time job. What was it about writing, specifically about true crime, that caught your interest?
I actually don't think it was true crime per se. I think it was this story about Jason and Michelle. I had never intended to write anything other than for my job, but I was deluged with reporting on TV by people like you on the Jason Young case, and News and Observer, Ann Blythe, who eventually became a good friend and helped me with my writing. There was something about Michelle in particular. She had migrated from Long Island to go to college at NC State, met a Southerner, married him, had a child with him that was almost identical to my path. I grew up in Long Island. I went to college at UNC, so I made the same journey down south, married a Southerner, had children with her. My marriage didn't work out. It ended differently than Michelle's, obviously, quite unfortunately, but there were so many things that were in common. And then I knew several of the people that were involved in the case. And I kind of said to myself as a midlife challenge, if nobody else has written this book, why not me? And then I met you and talked about it, and you told me that you had actually written the first 50 pages of this book and put it on the side and eventually decided you were writing fiction, so you gave me your green light, go ahead, go for it, and I did.
You know, as a person who has written many books, it's a daunting task. I don't think people really know what they're getting into. So, did you know what you were getting into, and what surprised you about not the story? We'll get into that, but about just the action of writing a book.
So I had no idea what I was getting into, which is why I met with you early in the process. I was kind of half hoping you would say, "No, you're getting in way over your head. This isn't going to work. Give up." But darn it, you said, "No, you can do this. Go for it." And here I am, all these years later. I'm working on my fifth book now. The writing process was fun. I enjoyed the heck out of it. I had no idea what I was doing. I've never taken any courses in writing. I wasn't an English major. Putting sentences together I could do. I've been doing that my whole career. But what came out was halfway decent, and I've learned a lot about writing since. The hard part was, in this particular story, no one would talk to me. So you had the advantage of reporting on the story and talking to a lot of the people involved as you were reporting on the story. All of the friends of Michelle and Jason passed on talking to me. This was way too raw and emotional. They just didn't want to be involved. There was only one person who talked to me who was involved in this story, who was Jack Michaels, who was the wrongful death lawyer for Michelle and Linda. But aside from the little bit of talking he did with me, the rest of it I had to glean from the transcripts, from the video of all of the court proceedings, and there was tons of that on your wonderful station WRAL. But that's how I learned about these people, was literally from what the key people said about each other during the trials, and I was able to turn that into a narrative. It's not the ideal way to do it, and that's one of the things that I asked you. I remember, do you think I can do this if all I have is really the court records and the transcripts and the video? Can I actually put together a story? And you said, yeah, I think you can. And lo and behold, I did. And actually, this is my best-selling book by far to date.
I think that is the biggest challenge, is getting people to talk. And I've had that experience for me when I've written books and also doing podcasts. But there's a lot there, like you said, to put the narrative together. So the book is called Murder on Birchleaf Drive, which is where this happened in Wake County, North Carolina. Talk to me a little bit more about how you really just glommed onto this particular case. You said that it caught your attention because there were so many parallels with your life.
Yeah, and so the other piece was Brian Collins. Brian worked for Tharrington Smith when I was a first year associate, first year of law school. At the end of the summer, you go into the summer, you try and get a job. I had a job at Tharrington Smith. Brian was a very young lawyer there, and I'd been following his career. And when I learned he was involved in this big case, I actually watched a live stream from WRAL of his closing argument in the first trial. I believe I watched Jason Young's testimony in that first trial. There was something about this case that was riveting to me. I had no idea I was going to, many years later, over a decade later, or almost a decade later, I was going to write a book about it. I was just fascinated by the case. I was fascinated by the people involved. I was fascinated by the fact that Jason Young was almost acquitted in that first trial. I was fascinated by how he took the witness stand after having never said a word to anyone, to his family, to law enforcement. For all those years, he takes the witness stand and nobody has any idea what he's going to say. And he takes the prosecution completely by surprise and clearly convinced a number of jurors that he was telling the truth.
Yeah, and I think what was also really interesting about this case from my perspective was the fact that they tried him again. I mean, even after a mistrial, a lot of prosecutors will say, we're not going to do it again. It's too much time, too many resources. But they went ahead and tried it again.
Well, I think prosecutors will generally try a first-degree murder case a second time if there's a single hung juror, if there are two jurors who wouldn't go along with the guilty verdict. But this was an 8-4 vote in favor of acquittal. I think you're right. I think it would be very unusual for a retrial in that circumstance. But ultimately, the lead prosecutor, Howard Cummings, believed it could be done a lot better the second time around, and they did it a lot better the second time around. And the defense didn't have the element of surprise anymore, so everything turned on its head in the second trial. Now the prosecution had a couple of years to work with Jason's testimony and find all of the things that made no sense, all of the things that they could disprove, and they did a phenomenal job doing that in the second trial. And lo and behold, 12 jurors unanimous guilty.
So obviously you kind of, in your own way, got to know the people involved in this case because you researched them and you watched the video and you read transcripts. What was your impression of Jason Young?
My impression of Jason Young was that he was the quintessential salesman. And in a slimy way, right? When you think of a salesman, you think of a guy on a car lot, who could sell his grandmother a $25,000 car that really fairly priced was about an $18,000 car. That's the kind of guy that Jason Young was. He had a lot of charisma. He could charm the pants off anyone, and he did charm the pants off many females during his marriage, before his marriage. And remember, Michelle was pregnant before they even decided to get married. So he had a lot of notches on his bedpost when he was a student at NC State, and he kind of lived as a frat boy. He did have a professional life as a salesman, but kind of lived as a frat boy all throughout his adult life until this happened. Took very little responsibility. Loved his daughter, no question about it. Was great with her, but took very little responsibility when it came to adult things. He was a kid in a man's body, and he enjoyed the good things in life and didn't want to take responsibility for things that were hard.
And I've heard it said by the prosecutors that he never, ever acted like a married man. I mean, that he was always having affairs. It was, he was a serial infidelity person when it comes to his personal life.
And he was only married for 3 years. It's not like, the marriage got stale, and he was only married for 3 years, and they were pregnant with their second child. So, he clearly was having intimate relations with his wife because they were pregnant with their second child, but that wasn't enough for Jason. He wanted to live on the edge, and it wasn't just in terms of extramarital affairs. It was with drinking. He drank excessively, often. There are embarrassing things that he did, they're in the book, like once winding up completely naked in the middle of a party, and because he was just so drunk that he couldn't even control himself. He would go to tailgates at NC State. He wouldn't even make it into the game. He'd be so drunk. I mean, he just had no maturity for a guy who was living in the adult world.
Yeah, and I think there was an anecdote about him swallowing his wife's ring at one point, the engagement ring.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it wasn't Michelle's ring. It was the ring of Carol Ann Sowerby, if I'm remembering the story right, who was a friend of his from way back when in childhood, who he had a tryst with while Michelle was away in New York a couple of weeks before the murder, and he pretended to swallow the ring. Michelle came back from the trip. They were all having dinner together, and he pretended to swallow Carol Ann Sowerby's ring, and Michelle was really pissed off at him for doing that. And he said, no, look, it's been in my mouth the whole time. So he was a jokester. He was a prankster. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on your air, but he did dick tricks at weddings. He would actually take his private parts out and play with them in public and call them his dick tricks. And because that's how immature this guy was. He was over the top, and yet he also had this charm and charisma and kind of bad boy appeal that attracted all of these women, married women like Michelle Money, the woman he was in the middle of an affair with right at the time of the murder, where he was calling her incessantly, including on the day he killed his wife.
Yeah, and a lot of those women did come to testify at trial. They came to testify at both trials. I mean, it was fascinating. So what did you learn about Michelle?
Michelle was as vanilla and as smart. I mean, Michelle had so much in common with me. And I guess I am vanilla. She was a straight A student. She did extremely well in college at NC State. She was a cheerleader at NC State. She was very, very driven. She was an accounting major. She got her accounting degree. She became a CPA. She worked for Progress Energy, a Fortune 500 company. She was progressing well. Everything was going so well for her, except in this one area, which was her numbskull husband that she married because he knocked her up. But she was a delightful human being. She was a New Yorker, so there were cultural differences. Her mother took some getting used to, and I could understand some of Jason's qualms about the degree to which Michelle Fisher was involved in Michelle's life. Linda Fisher was involved in Michelle's life, her mom. They were on the phone every day. There were some codependency issues between the two of them. And Linda wasn't thrilled, not surprisingly, about the way Jason was treating Michelle. And when they were together, which was a lot, because Linda came down to Raleigh a lot, especially after Cassidy was born, she didn't make any bones about her feelings about Jason and his lack of responsibility and the way he was treating Michelle.
Did you have preconceived notions about this story before you went into it, and were any of those overturned?
The only notions I had were what I saw from the various things that happened at trial that I paid attention to. I did not watch all aspects of either trial. I just chose a couple of spots to watch. I had preconceived notions that there was some excellent lawyering for Jason Young. Those were confirmed without a doubt. Jason had the best defense no money could buy because he didn't pay a penny for his defense. The public defender's office, which was the original public defender, Brian Collins and Mike Klinkasum, they tried the hell out of that. It was almost like he had O.J. Simpson's defense lawyers. That's how fortunate he was. So the notion that he had ineffective assistance of counsel, which he later claimed was a joke, he had wonderful lawyers. But in terms of the overall story, I learned a lot doing my research for the book about the culture clash. The culture clash was significant. If you look at where Jason's from, Brevard, and his family, his mom and his stepdad and his sisters, I mean, these are almost hillbillies. If you come from New York, it's like you're in hillbilly land when you're in Brevard, and you're in the Big Apple when you're somebody like Michelle and her family. Those are hard to mix together. And so not only was it difficult for Michelle and Jason, it was difficult for the extended family on both sides. And that was a huge source of Jason's frustrations because Linda wanted to be part of their holidays. Linda wanted to be part of their life. Linda wanted to be very involved with Cassidy. And Jason couldn't stand Linda, Michelle's mom, couldn't stand her. And then with the new child coming along, Michelle said, we want to build a mother-in-law suite for her. And that was, I think, in Howard Cummings' words, that was the last straw for Jason. The notion that Linda was actually going to move in, the person he couldn't stand that was watching over everything that he did, she was going to move in and be there to watch him day and night. He was not ever going to allow that to happen.
Anything surprise you about what you learned?
Well, what surprised me is that there wasn't evidence of more. There were clearly more affairs that Jason had. Because he was a salesman, he was gone a lot, he was out of town on sales calls. It's interesting to me that they only brought a couple of these women. There were two that he was having an active affair they had sex with within the month or so prior to Michelle's death. There was a former fiancée that he wasn't actively having sex with. She was now married, but he was professing his love to her in a long email just less than a month before the murder. There were clearly other women. I guess at some point the prosecution decided, overkill, we don't need all of them, we just need the important ones. And Michelle Money was really the important one because they were in an extended affair. And the really sad part about Michelle Money, she was Michelle Young's sorority sister. They were really close friends going back to their freshman days at NC State. I mean, they rode the bus together during sorority rush. They became great friends. And for Michelle Money to have done that to Michelle Young behind her back is just really, really awful.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that the prosecutors said, and I've heard this in other cases, is the being unfaithful doesn't equal being a murderer. Let's be clear on that. That would be crazy because there are plenty of people who are unfaithful who never kill their spouses. But in this case, it went to his character in terms of the lying, which was a big factor. And, I thought the strategy was interesting from the defense, which is, I'm not a great husband. I did all these bad things, but I loved my wife and I didn't do this bad thing.
I think you just summed up in 10 seconds the 2.5 or 3 hours of Jason Young on the witness stand. That was the banner headline of the way he presented himself and the way his lawyers presented him from opening statement on through. And I think that was the right defense approach. And it's why he almost got acquitted. He basically owned up to not being a good husband, not being a good human being overall, good father, and no one actually disputed that he was a good father in terms of how engaged he was in his child's life. Not responsibility-wise, but how engaged he was in his child's life. And all of that came through. Again, he's a salesman. And he made an excellent sales pitch to that first jury that I'm not this monster who would bludgeon my wife to death in cold blood, which is how she was killed.
Is there anything that sticks out in your mind? Is there one thing, one piece of evidence, one moment that you think was a turning point for that jury, the one that convicted him?
Well, the turning point in terms of the evidence is the Hampton Inn. So, there's a whole chapter in my book on circumstantial evidence and how compelling circumstantial evidence can be. So what the prosecution had going for it more than anything else was that Jason was supposedly 169 miles away at a Hampton Inn in Hillsville, Virginia, and yet you have the security camera footage showing him leaving the hotel about an hour after he checks in. You have a security camera that was literally unplugged within a half an hour of when he checks in. You have that camera being replugged in at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and then at 6 something in the morning, 6:35 in the morning, it's pushed up against the ceiling. And if you do the math on all the traveling that Jason had to do to get back to Raleigh, all of that fit perfectly. And how did all of those things happen at the Hampton Inn, coincidentally, on the day that Michelle Young is killed in Raleigh? I mean, the chances that Jason Young checks into that hotel, only uses his swipe card one time when he goes to his door to check into his room, and yet we know he was gone, right? Because he left, he's on security cameras. None of it makes any sense unless Jason was actually leaving the hotel to head back to Raleigh to kill his wife. The Hampton Inn evidence was crucial in convicting Jason.
Yeah, and I also think the gas station evidence, the clerk at the gas station.
I disagree.
Okay. Hey, that's what a podcast is all about. Tell me why.
So Gracie Doms, Gracie Calhoun, Gracie Bailey, she went by 3 different names during the course of the few years because she got married and remarried and divorced. And her brain, actually, she testified in the second trial, was lying on the curb when she was hit by a car, and they had to put it back in her head. Gracie testified that this man drove up in an SUV, was in a rush. She wanted him to show ID because it was very early in the morning, like 5:30. He refused to do it. He threw a $20 bill at her and cussed at her, and she said she would always remember him. But when Mike Klinkeson put her under cross-examination, he got her to say that the guy that she was talking to that did those things was about her height. She was 5 feet tall. The guy who did all of those things to her, he was pretty much bald. Jason Young had such a full head of hair. If you watch him during his testimony, he constantly has to move it out of his eyes. That's how much hair he had. And on and on and on. Gracie Calhoun, Gracie Bailey, Gracie, whatever her name was, her testimony was not convincing at all. In fact, I am critical in the book of the prosecution even putting her on as a witness. Yes, if she was telling the truth and she was accurate, the only reason Jason Young would have been at her gas station in King, North Carolina at that time of day on the morning of Michelle's death was because he was returning from killing Michelle. I get it. If you believe her, she's a home run. But she was the weak link in the prosecution evidence, and they didn't need her. They had so much other evidence, and the cross-examination was so devastating. I've actually taught legal education on cross-examination, and I've used Mike Klinkesum's cross of Gracie Bailey. Like, he destroyed her. He disemboweled her in 5 minutes. How could a person identify another human being and be correct when they're about a foot off on the height, when the person she describes as bald has a very thick head of hair? It didn't make any sense.
Yeah, and those are all details that I didn't recall. So obviously you have studied that much deeper. And Mike, and you're right, Mike is a great attorney and did such a good job in that trial. What did you get out of this story in terms of your own personal understanding? I mean, you're obviously an attorney, but your personal understanding of relationships and divorce, and this being a cautionary tale in that, just get divorced. I mean, why do something like this, right?
You stole my answer. You got right to it. And I'm a divorce lawyer. I've been doing divorce work for 11 years, and the answer is always. Now, Jason's told his friends he couldn't get divorced from Michelle. Why? Because she was going to move back to New York with Cassidy, and he'd never get to see Cassidy. Well, if he had been to a lawyer and done a consultation with somebody like me, I would have told him that almost never happens. Judges here almost never allow a parent to relocate somewhere far away with their child if there is a dutiful parent on the other side. That if the child's been raised here for any portion of their life, the heavy burden is on the parent who wants to move them away. And Michelle probably would not have been permitted to do that. And if Jason killed Michelle because of his fear that if they got divorced, that she was going to move away with Cassidy, it was such a senseless death. And he didn't only kill Michelle, he killed the son that, by all accounts, that was going to be born in a few months. He killed the son that he always wanted to have, to pass down his name. His dad had died of cancer. He was the only remaining young left, and he wanted that son. And so to kill his son, unborn son, to kill his wife under the misimpression that if he got divorced from Michelle, he'd never see Cassidy again. Go to a divorce lawyer. If you're having these thoughts, talk yourself out of the wild things you're thinking about. Go to a divorce lawyer, understand your rights. It's probably not half as bad as you're thinking, and it certainly doesn't justify taking another human being and then spending the rest of your life in prison, which is where Jason will be until he dies.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look back at that time, we didn't have the technology that we have now. But now, I mean, with surveillance cameras and GPS and being able to track your every move on your phone, it's almost impossible to get away with anything. And to your point, I think the children in these cases are always the victims because they lose a parent to prison, they lose a parent to death, they lose a parent to prison. The good news in this case is that this child has done well, and that's credit to the family that raised her, to Michelle's family who raised her.
Well, it often is the case, as it was for the first 3 years after Michelle's death, that a child in this situation is being raised by the parent who killed the other parent or had the other parent killed. That was true for the first 3 years after Michelle Young died in November 2006 until they arrested Jason. So that is why children tend to be so messed up when they're in situations like this, is because they're being raised by a killer. The fortunate thing that happened here is that through some really good lawyering of a guy named Mike Shalosky, who's a family law attorney here in Raleigh, he's semi-retired now, he was able to wrest custody away from Jason, and ultimately, and that was one of the huge things in the second trial that really hurt Jason, is that he gave up custody of Cassidy. But ultimately, Cassidy was raised by Michelle's side of the family, and that love and support and recollections and remembrances of who her mom was with her from the time she was 3-4 years old forward. And so ultimately, Jason and his family had very little responsibility for raising Cassidy. But I understand that Cassidy has maintained some relationship with that side of the family too. I don't know if she's had a relationship with Jason himself, but my understanding is that she has kept her paternal grandparents and aunts involved in her life.
And that's her prerogative as an adult. And I think the most important thing is that they get to make that decision as an adult,
Yes.
not as a child when things are very chaotic. Anything else that comes to mind that we haven't discussed about the impression that this case has left on you?
Nothing that comes to mind. It's just a very, very sad story this was all so avoidable. What happened to Michelle was so awful. I mean, she was beaten so severely. I can still bring up some of the pictures, which are not in the book for obvious reasons, but I've seen them and I'll never be able to shake the pictures of what she looked like after this happened. It was just awful. And we haven't even talked about the fact that Cassidy was there. Cassidy literally walked through her mom's blood, put a baby doll beside her bloody head, it talked about when Meredith finally came to rescue her, talked about mommy has boo-boos everywhere. I mean, just awful stuff. And for Jason to have put all of the people involved, when somebody like Michelle Young is murdered, it's not just one person who's affected. It is probably, at the end of the day, when you count everybody up, dozens and dozens and dozens of people who you have harmed by your action. And most significantly, this child that you profess to loving, that you got on the witness stand and talked about being the most important person in your life, to have taken her mother away in such brutal fashion. Just awful.
Yeah, it is. Again, the children are always the one that are the victims in this case, the extended victims. What are you working on now, Steve?
I'm working on something that is almost identical to the staircase. It is a fall in a shower in Syracuse, New York, where the 61-year-old wife of an obstetrician was pronounced dead on scene, very much like Kathleen Peterson at the bottom of a staircase. She had supposedly, Leslie Newlander, who I'm writing about, had supposedly fallen in her shower and hit her head, producing a gaping wound that killed her. Her husband was there with her, just like Michael Peterson was there with his wife. And ultimately, the coroner ruled it an accident, that she had fallen in the shower. And lo and behold, there was a lot more to the story than that. It's enough to fill a whole book. It's been on Dateline. It's been on 48 Hours. And sometime in the next year and a half or so, it'll be on bookshelves and on Amazon.
And where can people find your books?
On Amazon is the best place to find my books. You can also go to my website, stevenbepstein.com.
Okay, Steve, thank you so much for sharing your research and your insight into this case.
Thanks, Amanda, for having me. You have been a guiding light to me as a true crime writer, and I appreciate that very much.